I'd just like to wrap up by relating a little bit of an anecdote. You know, we said on the conference announcement here, the title of the conference was Making Sense, with the sub-questions, how do you, and how do you know? And I had the opportunity to pick up several of you at the airport when you flew in, but if I'd have picked up each one of you and asked you these questions when you flew in on Thursday night or yesterday morning or whenever, you probably would have answered in the affirmative that yes, I make sense, I know what I'm talking about, I know how I make sense. Or maybe I don't know how, but yeah, I make sense. I don't have nonsensical opinions. But after sitting here for 2 days, maybe now you have some different opinions. Maybe they're still sensical, but they're not the same sensical that they were 2 days ago. And opinions that you had about people, opinions that you had about issues, opinions that you had about processes, all could have changed. And yet, if you still think of yourself, I am a sensible person, but not the same sensible person. And so I would say that as a theory, or a possible definition of making sense, if we might think of it in kind of mathematical terms, as making sense as a function of knowledge plus awareness. Because no matter how much we know, there's always the possibility that there's something that we don't know that makes our actions or our decisions or our opinions nonsensical. And as an example of that, I'd like to read just a short anecdote from the book The World Is My Garden by David Fairchild. David Fairchild was one of the honorary trustees of the Institute who knew Korzybski back in the 20s. David Fairchild was well known back in the late 1800s to early 1900s as for working for the Department of Agriculture. And his job with the Department of Agriculture was to travel around the world looking for plants to bring into the United States, either for cash crops, for food crops, for soil erosion, for a variety of reasons. And he and Korzybski got to be pretty good buddies, and his wife, Miriam, was the daughter of Alexander Graham Bell. So we're two people removed from Alexander Graham Bell within the general semantics community. And in fact, those of you who were at Reed House last night, if you happen to notice on the little desk there that was kind of part of the Korzybski shrine. Quote mark shrine. There is a I guess we could just call it an ashtray, which was inscribed by David and Miriam Fairchild, given to Korzybski in 1923, in which they say that this was one of the items that Alexander Graham Bell used to dump his pipe into.
So to the cosmic pipe dreamer,
one person's trash is another man's treasure. But there's an anecdote, and throughout The World Was My Garden was his memoirs that were written in 1936. And there's example after example after example of his extensional orientation in going out into the rest of the world, where in some cases no white person had ever been, and no English-speaking person had ever been, looking for plants and samples to bring back to the United States to try to grow crops. And in one of those visits in 1899, he visited Panama. I'd just like to read this short example of what we don't know may result in our not making sense. He said in 1899, the French attempt to build the Panama Canal had collapsed. And as of yet, the yellow fever mosquito had not been suspected of carrying the disease. The old French hospitals were still standing, and in the open space between them, on the ground, lay great piles of iron crosses imported from France, each with a serial number on it, already with the name of the patient for whom that grave was expected to be filled. In fact, all the patients were measured for coffins immediately after they were admitted to the hospital, because practically none ever emerged alive. The Sisters of St. Vincent, who were in charge of the hospitals, kept potted plants on the windowsills to make the wards more cheerful. Under each of the potted plants were saucers, and as the plants were watered daily, water always stood in the saucers. In consequence, mosquitoes bred there and fed on the yellow fever patients, thus becoming infected themselves with the parasite. In turn, they infected nearby patients who might otherwise have escaped. So in our quest to make sense, we need to keep aware of what do we not know. And in our quest to help others understand why we make sense, we need to make sure that we try to understand what do we not know, what